They said the Alpha King feared nothing. Lyra Ashenmore knew the truth. She knew what made him lose control. For 3 years, she had hidden her darkest fantasy in plain sight, buried beneath silence and shadows, and the careful invisibility of a woman who understood that wanting the wrong thing could destroy you. She worked the night shift in the Royal Archives because darkness was safer than scrutiny, because ancient manuscripts didn't judge, because in the candle-lit corridors of forgotten history, no one noticed when her pulse quickened at the sound of his footsteps 3 floors above. No one knew what she imagined in the hours between midnight and dawn. No one suspected that her fantasies ran deeper than submission, darker than surrender. She didn't dream of being commanded. She dreamed of being chosen, of watching that legendary control finally willingly break for her. But on the night Cale Thornwolf came to her bleeding, his silver eyes shadowed with something she'd never seen before. Lyra realized something terrifying. Her fantasy was about to become real, and she had no idea if either of them would survive it. The Stonewolf Dominion stretched across the northern territories like a scar across frozen earth. Power was law here. Alphas ruled packs. Kings ruled alphas. And Omegas like Lyra were expected to soften the sharp edges of that brutal world without ever daring to shape it. The mate bond was sacred but forbidden for royalty. The council claimed desire made rulers reckless, that love made them weak. Alpha King Cale Thornwolf had ruled for 12 years without a mate, long enough that the court whispered he was broken. Long enough that rival packs tested his borders like wolves circling wounded prey. Long enough that the council had stopped asking and started demanding. Lyra served as a royal archivist cataloging the bloodlines and treaties that kept the Dominion from tearing itself apart. Safe, invisible, trusted with secrets, but never seen as one herself. Perfect for an Omega who had learned early that wanting the wrong thing could get you punished or claimed. The first thing Lyra noticed that night was the silence. For years, that silence had been her refuge. The archive halls stretched empty after dark, lit only by oil lamps that cast wavering shadows across ancient stone. She preferred the night shift. No courtiers whispering about Omega placement, no visiting alphas whose gazes lingered too long. Just her, the dusty records, and the peculiar peace of a world that had forgotten she existed. Tonight, the silence felt different. Wrong. She was reshelving a collection of border treaties when the air shifted. Not a sound exactly. More like a pressure change that made her wolf stir beneath her skin. The creature had been dormant for so long, Lyra had almost forgotten what awareness felt like. Now she lifted her head. Nostrils flaring. Danger. Blood. Lyra's hands stilled on the leather-bound volume. She inhaled slowly, sorting through the scents that drifted down from the upper levels. Stone and parchment. Lamp oil and dust. And underneath it all, faint but unmistakable iron. Fresh blood. The alarm bells hadn't rung. No guards had rushed past. Whatever had happened, the castle didn't know yet. She should have left it alone. Should have continued her work, pretended she'd noticed nothing. That's what a smart Omega would do, the kind who understood that curiosity could get you killed or worse noticed. Instead, she followed the scent. The lower archive corridors twisted like a maze, narrow passages carved from the mountain itself. Lyra moved through them by memory more than sight. Her soft leather shoes silent on stone, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The blood scent grew stronger. Her pulse quickened. She rounded a corner and stopped. Alpha King Cale Thornwolf leaned against the wall. One hand pressed to his side where blood seeped dark between his fingers. His armor hung in cracked pieces, revealing tears in the leather beneath. His breathing came shallow and controlled. Too controlled. Even wounded, even alone, he held himself like a drawn blade. Their eyes met. For the moment, neither of them moved. Lyra watched his pupils dilate. Watched him process her presence with that unsettling focus that made him so dangerous. Cale noticed everything. Hesitations, breathing changes, the tiny betrayals the body made before the mind could catch up. He was noticing her now. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough with pain. "I work here," she replied, somehow keeping her voice steady. "The upper archives." His silver gaze never left her face. Not the abandoned corridors where kings come to bleed in private. He was giving her an out, a chance to pretend she'd seen nothing, to walk away and preserve the careful invisibility she'd built her entire life around. She should have taken it. Instead, she closed the door behind her and heard the lock click into place. The sound of the lock echoed in the narrow corridor like a verdict. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as she turned back to face him. The Alpha King hadn't moved, but his eyes had darkened. That predatory focus sharpening into something that made her wolf press low and still inside her chest. "That was foolish," Cale said quietly. "Probably." Lyra crossed the space between them, each step feeling like a choice she couldn't take back. Let me see the wound. I've survived worse and bled out alone in forgotten corridors. She stopped just out of reach, close enough to smell the copper tang of blood mixed with something else. Pine and winter air. The scent that clung to him after he'd been running. Let me see it. For a long moment he simply watched her. Then slowly he removed his hand from his side. The gash ran deep across his ribs, the edges ragged, as if something had torn rather than cut. Blood welled thick and dark, soaking into the ruined leather of his undershirt. Lyra's breath caught. This wasn't a training accident. This was an ambush. Who did this? She asked, already moving closer. Assassins. 3 of them. His voice remained steady despite the blood loss. I dealt with them. Clearly. Lyra pulled a clean cloth from her archival supplies, meant for handling delicate documents now pressed against a king's wound. This needs stitching. In the morning, the royal physician will ask questions you don't want to answer. She applied pressure, feeling him tense beneath her hands. Muscle and heat and barely restrained power. That's why you came here instead of your chambers. Kale's jaw tightened. You're perceptive. I'm an archivist. I notice what doesn't fit the pattern. Lyra kept her eyes on the wound, not trusting herself to look at his face. Not this close. Not with her hands on his skin. 3 assassins shouldn't have gotten past your guard, which means someone let them in. That, he said softly, is a dangerous conclusion to voice aloud. Then it's fortunate we're alone in an abandoned corridor where kings come to bleed in private. Something shifted in the air between them. Lyra felt it like static before a storm. That electric awareness that made her too conscious of every breath, every heartbeat. She was close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body despite the blood loss. Close enough to see the faint scar along his collarbone, the one that disappeared beneath his collar. She'd memorized that scar in her fantasies. Kale inhaled slowly, and Lyra realized her mistake. Her scent, the shift in her breathing, the way her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer proximity to something she'd wanted for so long. You're afraid, he observed, but it wasn't a question, it was a test. Yes, she lied. No. His hand came up slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to pull away. His fingers touched her chin, tilting her face until she had no choice but to meet his eyes. Fear has a scent. This isn't it. Lyra's pulse thundered in her throat. She should step back, should lower her eyes, should remember that alphas, especially kings, could sense desire the way wolves sensed weakness. But she'd already locked the door, already crossed every invisible line that kept Omega safe and invisible. You're imagining something, Kale said quietly, his voice dropping to that register that made her knees weak. Right now, in this moment. The words hit her like a physical touch. He knew. Somehow he knew. No, Lyra whispered the lie, tasting bitter on her tongue. His thumb brushed her jawline, the touch feather-light but devastating in its restraint. I can feel your pulse racing, see your pupils dilate, scent the shift in your... He stopped himself. Something flickered across his face. Not hunger. Something darker. Tell me to leave you alone, Lyra. It was the first time he'd ever spoken her name. She should have said yes. Should have used the escape he was offering. Should have remembered that her fantasies were meant to stay locked in her head, where they couldn't destroy her. Instead, she pressed the cloth more firmly against his wound and said, You're still bleeding. We need to move you somewhere safer. For a heartbeat, neither of them breathed. Then Kael's hand dropped from her face. There's a storage room 3 corridors east. No one uses it. I know the one. Of course she did. She knew every forgotten corner of these archives. Lyra wound the cloth tight around his ribs. Makeshift but functional. When she finished, Kale pushed off the wall with controlled effort. He swayed once barely perceptible, but she caught it. Without thinking, she moved to his side, ducking under his arm to brace him. The position pressed her against his uninjured side. Intimate, unavoidable. I can walk, he said. Then walk. But Lyra didn't move away. Neither did he. They moved through the shadowed corridors like conspirators, Lyra guiding them through passages she'd walked 1,000 times. Kael's weight against her felt surreal. This man who commanded armies leaning on an Omega archivist no one noticed. She was complicit now, in his wound, in his secrets, in whatever game of shadows and blood was playing out in the castle above their heads. And when they finally reached the storage room and she helped him settle against the wall, watching his silver eyes track her every movement, with that unsettling focus, Lyra understood one terrible truth. Her fantasy had never been the dangerous part. Reality was so much worse. Kael refused to return to his royal chambers. Too many eyes, he said, his voice tight with pain, as Lyra helped him settle onto the narrow cot in the storage room. Too many questions. Then where Lyra asked, though she already suspected the answer. The thought made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with concern. My private study, the one in the East Tower. His silver eyes met hers in the dim light. No guards, no servants, just me. And now apparently her. The walk through the castle's hidden passages felt endless. Lyra supported more of his weight than Kale would ever admit, feeling the tremors that ran through his frame. Exhaustion and blood loss finally catching up to legendary control. By the time they reached the tower study, dawnlight was bleeding gray through the narrow windows. The room was nothing like she'd imagined. No grand throne or display of power, just worn leather chairs arranged before a massive stone hearth. Shelves crammed with books and maps. A desk buried under reports. It looked lived in. Human, sit, Lyra commanded, guiding him toward the chair closest to the fireplace. Kyle actually obeyed, which told her exactly how badly he was hurting. She found clean cloth and water medical supplies tucked in a cabinet that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd tended his own wounds in secret. The thought sent ice through her veins. How many times had the Alpha King bled alone rather than show vulnerability? Lyra knelt beside his chair and began cleaning the wound properly. The gash looked worse in better light, deep and vicious, the kind that would scar. Her hands worked with steady precision, years of careful archival work translating into surprisingly competent field medicine. You're good at this, Kale observed, his voice low. I'm good at being careful. Lyra didn't look up, safer to focus on the wound than his face. It's how invisible people survive. You're not invisible. Her hands stilled. To you, maybe. Right now. Because you need help. No. Something in his tone made her look up. Kale was watching her with that unnerving focus. The one that felt like being seen down to the marrow. You've never been invisible to me. The confession hung in the air between them. Heavy and dangerous. Lyra forced herself to return to her work, threading the needle she'd found in the medical kit. The court would disagree. I've served in the archives for 3 years. You've never spoken to me before tonight. I've spoken to you 17 times. Her hands froze. What? 17 times, Kyle repeated quietly. The first was 2 years ago. You were carrying a stack of genealogy records that blocked your view. I held a door open. You thanked me without looking up. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The most recent was 6 days ago. You passed me in the corridor outside the council chambers. You dropped your gaze and whispered, Your Majesty, so softly I almost didn't hear it. Lyra stared at him, the needle forgotten in her hand. He'd counted. He'd remembered. Why the word escaped before she could stop it? I don't know. Kale's expression shifted, frustration flickering across features that rarely showed anything. That's what unsettles me. I notice details. It's necessary for survival. But with you, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I notice everything. The way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're concentrating. How you mouth words while you read. That you take the night shifts because you prefer the silence. You're describing surveillance, Lyra said, though her voice came out breathless. I'm describing observation. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away before his fingers caught a strand of her hair. There's a difference. Lyra's heart hammered. She should move, should remember her place, should ask how others look at him instead. The question tumbled out unbidden. How do others look at you? Kale's hand dropped. For a moment, something raw flickered across his face. With fear, with calculation, with the weight of what they want from me. He leaned his head back against the chair, exhaustion carving lines around his eyes. The court sees a crown. The pack see a weapon. The council sees a problem to be managed. And what do you see when you look in the mirror? The question seemed to surprise him. Kale was quiet for a long moment, firelight casting shadows across the brutal architecture of his face. Someone trying very hard not to become the monster everyone expects. The honesty of it struck her like a blow. Lyra had spent years imagining what lay beneath his control, but she'd never considered this. That his restraint wasn't just discipline, but desperate prevention. That he feared himself more than anyone feared him. You're not a monster, she said softly. You don't know that. I know you gave me 17 chances to see you as human. Lyra resumed, stitching her hands steady despite the trembling in her chest. A monster wouldn't bother counting. Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of fire and the whisper of thread through skin. Kale didn't flinch as she worked, but she felt the tension in him. Not from pain, but from proximity, from being seen in return. When she finished, Lyra tied off the final stitch and sat back. Done. You'll need to rest and stay. The word stopped her mid-breath. Just Kale's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something unguarded in that silver gaze. A little longer, please. It wasn't a command, it was a request. And Lyra, who had spent her entire life being careful, being invisible, being safe, found herself settling onto the floor beside his chair without a word. Outside, the sun continued its slow rise over the Stone Wolf Dominion. Inside, something far more dangerous was awakening between an Omega who hid her fantasies and a king who noticed everything. Lyra stayed for 3 days, not continuously. That would have sparked rumors even the castle's thick walls couldn't contain. But she returned each evening after her archive shift ended, slipping through the hidden passages with supplies and fresh bandages, pretending this was merely duty and not the slow unraveling of every defense she'd ever built. On the second night, Kael asked her to read to him. The wound makes it difficult to focus, he said, though Lyra suspected the truth was simpler and more devastating. He was lonely. She chose carefully from his collection, avoiding romantic epics and settling on the founding of the Northern Pax. A dry political history that should have been safe. It wasn't. And so the Omega Accords were signed. Lyra read aloud, firelight dancing across the ancient pages, establishing that unmated Omegas of breeding age would be held in trust by the Council, distributed to strengthen territorial alliances and ensure Pax stability. Distributed. Kael's voice cut through the crackling silence, sharp with disgust, as if they were grain stores, resources to be allocated. Lyra's fingers tightened on the book. It was a different time. It was 3 generations ago. He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. My grandfather signed those accords. The council still quotes them when they push their political matches. You've refused everyone, Lyra said carefully. It was common knowledge in the castle. The Alpha King's stubborn resistance to taking a mate had become its own form of legend. Because I won't treat someone as currency. Kael's jaw tightened. The bond is supposed to be sacred, not a treaty sealed with a body. The bitterness in his voice caught her off guard. Lyra had assumed his refusal came from that legendary control, from not wanting the vulnerability a mate would require. She'd never considered it might be principle. The council claims stability requires strategic bonds, she ventured. The council claims many things. His eyes met hers, including that Omegas are happier when their choices are made for them. Silence stretched between them like a blade. Do you believe that, he asked? The question hung in the air, demanding truth. No, Lyra admitted quietly. I believe we learned very young that wanting the wrong thing is dangerous. So we stopped wanting at all. Something shifted in Kael's expression. Recognition, maybe. Or grief. And if you could want freely? The words trembled on her tongue. I'd want you. I'd want to be chosen, not assigned. I'd want to watch your control break because you trusted me enough to let it. Instead, she turned back to the book. Shall I continue? Kael let her retreat. He always did. Lyra read for another hour, her voice filling the quiet spaces of the tower study. The history was brutal. Wars over territory, packs destroyed, Omegas traded like spoils. But woven through it were smaller moments. A pair bond that stopped a decade-long feud, an Omega advisor whose strategy saved her pack from annihilation. Rare glimpses of love cutting through political machinery. Stop, Kael said suddenly. Lyra looked up. What? Go back. That last section. She backtracked to a passage she'd barely registered. Alpha Marcus of the Riverlands defied the council by bonding his chosen mate without approval. When challenged, he stated simply, I will not rule without her. If that makes me unfit, so be it. The council, facing either acceptance or civil war, yielded. He chose her, Kael said softly. Over his crown, over everything. He almost lost his kingdom, but he didn't lose her. Kael's gaze remained fixed on the fire. That's the part the council never mentions. That sometimes the thing they call weakness is actually the only honest strength we have. Lyra's breath caught. She understood suddenly that they weren't just talking about history anymore. The silence that followed felt different, charged with all the things neither of them could say. Lyra closed the book, her hands unsteady, and found Kael watching her with an expression that made her wolf stir restlessly. Tell me something true, he said. Something you've never told anyone. That's not fair, I know. But he didn't look away. Lyra considered lying, considered deflecting, considered all the safe responses an invisible Omega should give an Alpha King. Sometimes she whispered, I imagine what it would be like to be dangerous instead of careful. You are dangerous. Kael's voice dropped to barely above a murmur. You just don't realize it yet. Before she could respond, his eyes drifted closed. The exhaustion he'd been fighting finally claimed him, his breathing evening into the rhythm of sleep. Lyra should have left then, should have gathered her things and retreated to safety. Instead, she stayed. watching the firelight play across his features, memorizing the rare peace that softened the brutal lines of his face. Lyra, he murmured, still asleep. Didn't seem aware he'd spoken at all. Just her name, spoken like a secret, like a prayer. Her heart stopped. He didn't wake. Didn't seem aware of the unconscious confession that mirrored the fantasies she'd buried for so long. But Lyra heard it. The want in that single word. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her pulse thunder beneath her palm. This wasn't one-sided anymore. Whatever this was, this awareness, this pull, this dangerous recognition, it lived in both of them now, growing, multiplying, becoming something that couldn't be safely contained. Lyra finally understood why the council feared unbonded kings. Not because desire made them weak, but because love made them willing to burn the world down. And she was falling. They both were, into something that could save them or destroy everything they'd ever known. The wound healed faster than Lyra's carefully constructed distance. By the fourth day, Kael was moving through the castle again, slower than usual, favoring his left side, but present enough that the court stopped whispering about mysterious absences. Lyra returned to her archive duties, to her night shifts and her invisibility. She told herself it was better this way. She almost believed it. Then the council called an emergency session and Lyra's world tilted on its axis. She wasn't supposed to be there. The council chambers were forbidden to anyone below senior staff rank, but the archives shared a wall with the deliberation room and the ventilation shafts carried sound with perfect damning clarity. Lyra was cataloging inheritance disputes when the voices filtered through. 12 years, Your Majesty. Counselor Draven's reedy voice was unmistakable. 12 years without a mate bond. The packs are restless. They question your stability. My stability has kept this kingdom intact. Kael's response came cold and measured. Perhaps the council should concern itself with the assassination attempt rather than my personal affairs. The two are connected. This voice belonged to Counselor Morgan Vale, the Omega representative. Though Lyra had always found it darkly ironic that an Omega who'd been traded like cattle now helped perpetuate the system. An unbonded king is vulnerable, politically and physically. I survived 3 assassins, this time. Draven again. But what of the next attempt? What happens to the Dominion if you fall without an heir? Lyra's hands stilled on the document she'd been transcribing. She knew she should move away, should give them privacy, but her feet had forgotten how to move. We've prepared a list, Morgan's voice continued. Suitable Omegas from the major packs, strong bloodlines, politically advantageous matches. The sound of parchment sliding across wood. Omega Celeste from the Silver Pine pack. Her father controls the Eastern Territories. Omega Margaret from the Ironwood line. Their alliance would secure the northern borders. Omega Seraphina? No. The single word cut through the recitation like a blade. Your Majesty, Draven said carefully. You cannot continue refusing. I can refuse as long as these suitable Omegas are presented like livestock at auction. Kael's voice had dropped to that dangerous register Lyra recognized. Find me a list of intelligent, capable individuals who have agency over their own lives, and I'll consider it. Bring me another roster of political pawns, and I'll have you removed from this council. Silence crashed through the chamber. You're being unreasonable, Morgan said finally. The bond isn't about personal preference, it's about duty. Then perhaps Kael replied, duty, and I need to renegotiate our terms. Lyra heard him leave, footsteps sharp and angry, the council chamber doors slamming with enough force to rattle the ventilation grate. She should have felt relief, pride even at his refusal to treat Omegas as commodities. Instead, ice settled in her stomach, because Draven's voice drifted through again, quieter now, but sharp with calculation. He's protecting someone. Impossible, Morgan scoffed. We monitor all his interactions. There's been no one. Then explain his sudden interest in the welfare of unbonded Omegas. Explain why he's been spending evenings in the East Tower study when he's always preferred his royal chambers. The assassination attempt was 3 days ago. His wound is healed. Yet he continues to avoid his usual quarters. A pause heavy with implication. Someone has access to that study. Someone he trusts. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. You think he's already chosen? Morgan sounded intrigued rather than concerned. I think Draven said slowly that we need to identify every Omega who's had private access to the Alphaking in the past week, and we need to do it quietly. Lyra backed away from the ventilation shaft, her hands shaking. She'd been so careful. The hidden passages, the late hours, the absolute discretion. But careful wasn't the same as invisible, not when the council was looking. Lyra didn't go to the East Tower that evening, or the next. On the third night, Kyle found her in the lower archives. "You've been avoiding me," he said without preamble, appearing in the doorway like a shadow given form. Lyra kept her eyes on the manuscript she wasn't actually reading. "I've been working." Lyra, just her name, spoken the way he had in his sleep, like it meant something. She forced herself to look up. Kale stood in the entrance, blocking the only exit, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. But his body language betrayed him. Tension in his shoulders, something almost like hurt in the set of his jaw. "The council is investigating you," Lyra said quietly. "They think you're protecting someone. They're going to start monitoring anyone who's had private access to you. Let them, Kale." His name escaped before she could stop it. "Intimate and dangerous. If they find out that we've been, what?" He moved closer each step, deliberate. "That you've been helping me recover, that I've found someone whose company I actually value. What exactly are we hiding?" "Everything," Lyra thought. "The way I look at you, the way you say my name, the fact that my fantasies are becoming memories and I don't know how to stop wanting more. Your reputation," she said instead. "Your authority. The council will use me against you." "Then they'll learn," Kyle said, stopping, just close enough that she could feel his presence like heat, "that some things aren't negotiable." The words settled between them, heavy with promise and threat. Lyra's wolf stirred, not with fear, but with desperate, dangerous hope, because she finally understood what terrified her most. Not that the council would discover them, but that Kyle was willing to defy them. That her fantasy, being chosen over duty, over politics, over everything, was becoming real. And in the Stonewolf Dominion, where power was law and Omegas were leverage, that kind of choice could destroy them both. The council convened the next morning in emergency session. Lyra wasn't summoned. She learned about it the way she learned most things, through silence and shadows and the careful art of being unnoticed. But Commander Silas Ironheart found her before noon. "You need to come with me," he said. "Not a request. What happened? Is the king alive?" "Barely." Silas pulled her into an empty corridor, his scarred face grim. "Someone poisoned his morning tea." He collapsed during the council meeting. Ice flooded Lyra's veins. "Who?" "That's what we're trying to determine." Silas's eyes narrowed. "The tea service came from the royal kitchens, standard protocol. But the poison was wolf's bane extract, rare, expensive, requiring specific knowledge to prepare." The implication hit her like a physical blow. Wolf's bane, the herb she'd researched, the botanical texts accessed from her archivist station. "You think Lyra couldn't finish the sentence. "I think," Silas said carefully, "that someone is trying very hard to make it look like you. The head archivist reported that restricted botanical texts were accessed from your station last week. Texts detailing wolf's bane preparation. I was researching historical Omega suppression methods." Lyra's mind raced. "For a genealogy project on the Omega Accords. It's all documented in my work logs." "I believe you." Silas's expression softened fractionally. "But the council won't, especially not when they discover the king has been meeting with you privately. They know. They suspect. This poisoning gives them justification to investigate everyone close to him." He glanced down the corridor. "The king is demanding to see you, against my strong advisement. Then take me to him." Kale was in his private chambers, surrounded by healers and guards looking murderous, despite the pallor in his face. When Lyra entered, his silver eyes locked onto her with such intensity, she felt it like a physical touch. "Everyone out," he commanded. "Your Majesty, you need—" a healer began. "Out." The room cleared within seconds. Lyra stood frozen as the door closed, leaving them alone for the first time since the archives. Since the bond had nearly snapped between them. "You're alive," she said, uselessly. "Because I have a tolerance for wolf's bane that would kill most alphas." Kale's voice was rough, whether from the poison or something else. Years of building immunity to common assassination methods. Paranoid perhaps, but effective. "They think I did this. I know." He moved toward her, still unsteady but determined. "Which is why you're not leaving this wing." "Kale, I can't." "You can and you will." He caught her shoulders, his grip firm. "Someone set you up, Lyra. Someone who knows about us. Who knows it would destroy me to watch you be accused." The words hung between them, an admission neither could take back. "The council will call it proof you're compromised," Lyra whispered. "That your judgment is clouded by—" "By what?" Kale's jaw tightened. "Caring whether an innocent person is executed for a crime they didn't commit. You can't protect me against the entire council." Something dark flickered across his face. "Watch me." "Kyle." I would burn this kingdom to ash before I let them touch you. The confession came out raw and honest and terrifying. I hate that truth. I hate that they've made me choose between duty and... He stopped, breathing hard, and what Lyra's heart hammered. And the only person who's ever made me want to be more than just a king. The weight of it crashed over her. This wasn't protection born from political calculation or abstract principle. This was personal, visceral, the kind of protective instinct that turned alphas dangerous. You can't think like that, Lyra said desperately. The kingdom needs you stable, rational, not, not what, not willing to destroy anyone who threatens you. Kale's laugh was bitter. Too late. A sharp knock interrupted them. Commander Silas entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. We have a problem. Counselor Morgan is calling for the Omega Archivist's immediate arrest. She's convinced half the council that the king is under undue influence. Then convince them otherwise, Kale said coldly. I can't, not without revealing the extent of your association. Silas looked between them. They're voting on it now. If she wins, they'll take custody within the hour. Lyra felt the floor tilt beneath her. Custody, which meant interrogation, trial, execution if they found her guilty. Kale's hand tightened on her shoulder. Then we move her to the inner chambers. Postguards I trust personally. No one enters without my direct authorization. That will be seen as confirmation of her guilt. Silas's voice was measured. And of your compromise. I don't care. Your Majesty. The window exploded inward. Glass shattered across stone as three figures in black dropped through blades already drawn. Professional, coordinated, moving with the single-minded focus of trained killers, not just assassins. An execution squad. Lyra registered the silvered edges of their weapons, designed specifically to kill Omegas quickly. This wasn't about KL anymore. This was about eliminating her. Quayle moved before she could scream, shoving her behind him as his wolf surged forward. His eyes flashed gold canines lengthening as partial shift rippled through him. Touch her, he snarled, and I'll show you what an unbonded king is really capable of. The late assassin smiled. That's what we're counting on, Your Majesty. Then they attacked. The first assassin moved like water. Fluid, fast, deadly. Kael met him mid-strike, catching the silvered blade barehanded. Blood welled between his fingers, but he didn't flinch. Just twisted. Snapped the assassin's wrist. Sent him crashing into the stone wall with enough force to crack bone. The second assassin went for Lyra. She saw the blade arc toward her throat, saw her death reflected in polished silver, and her wolf screamed in defiance. But before she could move, Kael was there, moving faster than should have been possible. His body a shield between her and the weapon. The blade scored across his shoulder instead of her neck. Kael's roar shook the chamber. The shift rippled through him, not complete but devastating. His bones cracked and reformed. Muscle and sinew expanding, claws extending from fingers that were no longer quite human. His eyes blazed pure gold, all traces of silver consumed by his wolf's fury. Lyra had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her fantasies. Kael losing control. The civilized veneer stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. Reality was so much more terrifying and so much more beautiful. Because even as his wolf surged forward with lethal intent, even as he tore through the second assassin with brutal efficiency, he never stopped positioning himself between Lyra and danger. Every movement was calculated to protect her. Every strike designed to end threats before they could reach her. This wasn't mindless violence. This was precision, wrapped in savagery. The third assassin, seeing his companions fall, made a desperate lunge for Lyra, apparently deciding if he couldn't kill the king, he'd complete his actual mission. Kael caught him midair by the throat. She is mine, he snarled, voice distorted by the partial shift. And you will never touch her. The words reverberated through Lyra's chest like a claiming, primal and absolute. The assassin gurgled something, blade still raised. Kael's claws tightened. One sharp jerk, and it was over. Silence crashed through the chamber. Kael stood among the bodies, breathing hard. Blood his and theirs, staining his clothes and skin. His wolf still rode close to the surface, visible in the gold of his eyes and the tension in his frame. Dangerous, barely contained, he turned to Lyra. For a heartbeat, she saw the fear flash across his face. That raw terror of what she might see when she looked at him now. Not a king, not even a man. Just a wolf who'd killed to protect what was his. Lyra closed the distance between them. Don't, Kael said hoarsely. I can't. She placed her hand over his heart, felt it hammering beneath her palm. Frantic and powerful. I trust you, Lyra whispered. The words broke something in him. Kale made a sound half sob, half growl, and pulled her against his chest. Not roughly. Despite the blood and the violence and the wolf still riding his skin, his arms came around her with devastating gentleness. "You shouldn't," he said into her hair. "You saw what I saw you protect me." Lyra pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "I saw you stay in control even when you were letting go. I saw exactly what I've always imagined, Kale. Not dominance, not brutality, but restraint in the shape of violence. Power with purpose. That's not," his voice cracked, "that's not what I saw in the mirror. Then look at me instead." Kale's eyes searched her face looking for revulsion or fear or rejection. Finding none, something in him shattered. He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing ragged, his whole body trembling with the effort of pulling his wolf back from the edge. "This is what they feared," he said. "An unbonded king losing control for someone. You didn't lose control." Lyra's hand remained steady over his heart. "You chose violence to protect me. There's a difference. The council won't see it that way. I don't care what the council sees." The declaration hung between them. Lyra's own line in the sand. She'd spent her whole life being careful, being invisible, being safe. But Kael had shown her something more valuable than safety. He'd shown her what it meant to be chosen. The door burst open. Commander Silas entered with a full guard detail, weapons drawn only to freeze at the carnage. "Your Majesty." He took in the scene, the bodies, the blood. Kael's barely controlled shift. Lyra standing close, unafraid. "The Omega stays," Kael said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite his disheveled state. "In my chambers, under my personal protection. Anyone who questions this answers to me directly. The council will demand—" "The council," Kael interrupted, straightening to his full height, "will accept that their execution squad just tried to murder an innocent woman in my private chambers. They will accept that I eliminated the threat. And they will accept that questioning my judgment on this matter is questioning my fitness to rule." Silas stared at him. "You're forcing them to choose. I'm forcing them to recognize that some choices have already been made." Kael's hand found Lyra's, his fingers threading through hers, blood-stained and steady. "Spread the word. The Omega Archivist is under the King's direct protection. She stays by my side until the traitors in the council are identified and dealt with. Your Majesty, that's essentially a public claiming." "No." Kael's grip on Lyra's hand tightened. "It's a public choice. There's a difference." Lyra felt the bond stir between them, not snapping into place but strengthening, becoming something solid and real and impossible to deny. Silas looked between them, understanding dawning in his scarred face. "The council won't accept this quietly. Then they'll learn to accept it loudly." Kael's jaw set with that stubborn determination Lyra had come to recognize. "I've spent 12 years refusing to treat people as political currency. I'm not starting now, not even for the crown." Especially not for the crown, Lyra realized. Because somewhere between blood in the archives and violence in his chambers, Kael had stopped choosing between duty and desire. He'd simply chosen her. And in the Stonewolf Dominion, where power was law and kings were expected to sacrifice everything for stability, that choice was the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. It was also, Lyra thought as she squeezed his hand back, the most human. Commander Silas worked through the night. By morning, he'd identified the assassins. Elite mercenaries from the Shadowfang Syndicate. Payment traced to council members' private accounts. But there was something else. Encrypted messages that referenced someone called the Exiled One. Kael went pale when Silas showed him the evidence. "It can't be," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He died in the fire." Lyra looked between them. "Who died?" Kael sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 37 years. "My brother, Dante." "You had a brother?" For a moment, Kael didn't respond. Then he began to speak, and Lyra watched 15 years of buried grief and guilt surface in his eyes. "Dante was brilliant," Kael said quietly. "Charismatic, ruthless, 2 years younger than me, but twice as ambitious. He believed Omegas were inferior, that the strong had a right to rule the weak without question, that mercy was weakness and compassion was a liability. When our father died and the crown passed to me, Dante accepted it at first, but then I started changing things, questioning the Omega Accords, refusing political matches, treating people as individuals rather than assets. He saw it as weakness." Kael's jaw tightened. He gathered supporters, council members who believed as he did, planned a coup. "We confronted each other in the old keep. There was a fight, a fire started. The tower collapsed. I searched the rubble for days, but you never found a body?" "No," Kael met her eyes. I told myself he was dead, that I'd failed to save him, spent 12 years carrying that guilt. The idea that he might be alive, that he's been orchestrating this. Lyra knelt beside his chair. If he survived, the guilt isn't yours to carry. The choices were his, but the fear is mine. Kale's hand found hers. Because if Dante is behind this, he won't just want the throne. He'll want to prove his philosophy was right all along. That strength without mercy is the only way to rule. And I'm proof of the opposite. Exactly. Kale pulled her closer. You're everything he believed impossible. An Omega with intelligence, capability, strength. Someone who makes me better, not weaker. If he discovers you, he already has. Lyra squeezed his hand. The assassination attempt wasn't about you. It was about eliminating me. The realization settled over them like ice. Silas cleared his throat. There's something else, Your Majesty. I found these while researching the attacks. He spread documents across the desk. Old genealogies, bloodline records. The Omega archivist's mother, Silas said carefully, was born a Lara Moonshadow. Lyra's breath caught. That can't be right. The Moonshadows went extinct 2 centuries ago. Apparently not. Silas pointed to the records. The line survived in secret, hidden from the council. Your mother died when you were young. Correct? Lyra nodded numbly. I never knew her family name. I was raised in the archives. Orphaned at 3, because the council would have taken you otherwise, Kale said, understanding dawning. Moonshadows were Oracle Omegas, prophetic visions, the ability to sense bond threads before they formed. Lyra stared at him. That's not possible. I don't have your fantasies about me, Kale interrupted gently. You said you imagined my control breaking, that you saw us together. What if they weren't fantasies at all? What if they were visions of the future you were remembering? The world tilted. All those nights lying awake seeing Kale's face in her mind, feeling the pull toward him before they had ever spoken, knowing somehow that choosing him would change everything. Not imagination. Prophecy. There's more, Silas said. He pulled out an ancient text pages yellowed with age. An old Moonshadow prophecy. When Oracle chooses Wolf King, old laws will shatter. The bond will break chains. The kingdom will transform or fall. That's why the council wanted me dead, Lyra whispered. Not because I'm nobody, because I'm the catalyst for everything they fear. And if Dante knows, Kael's grip on her hand tightened. Then he knows I'm the key to his revenge, Lyra finished. Eliminate me and you're vulnerable. The prophecy fails. He can take the throne and prove that mercy is weakness after all. There's one more thing, Silas said grimly. The annual coronation ceremony is in 4 days. If the council calls a vote of no confidence and wins, the throne passes to the next living Thornwolf heir. If Dante is alive, Kael said slowly, he's positioning for his return. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. The assassination attempts, the poisoning, the frame job, all designed to isolate Kael, to make him appear compromised and unstable. And now with Lyra's bloodline revealed, Dante had the perfect propaganda. The Alpha King enthralled by an Oracle Omega, judgment clouded by prophecy and desire. We have 4 days, Silas said. 4 days to prove Dante is alive, to expose the council conspirators, to prevent a coup. 4 days before everything Kael had built came crashing down. The council delivered their ultimatum at sunset. Morgan Vale and Councilor Draven arrived with an armed escort. The message was clear. Denounce the Omega publicly, Morgan said without preamble. Declare her a threat and turn her over for trial, or we call the vote of no confidence tomorrow. Kael stood before them, every inch of the Alpha King. Over one innocent woman, you'd risk civil war. Over a king who's been compromised by Oracle prophecy, Draven replied. The border packs are restless. They see weakness, a ruler swayed by visions and desire rather than logic and strength. Then perhaps they need better vision. Kael's voice went cold. Because I see quite clearly. You've been taking bribes from someone, funding assassination attempts, poisoning your own king to frame an innocent woman. We have evidence. Fabricated evidence, Kael interrupted, found on her station but accessed by others. I've seen Silas's report. Then you also know she's Oracle-born, Morgan said. The prophecy speaks of chains breaking, laws shattering. Is that the stability the kingdom needs? The kingdom needs rulers who see people as individuals, not pawns, who understand that strength and choice aren't mutually exclusive. You're being unreasonable. I'm being human. Kael's eyes blazed. Something you seem to have forgotten how to be. Choose your majesty. Draven's smile was cold. the Omega, or your crown. They left Kale standing in his chambers, the ultimatum hanging in the air like smoke. Lyra had heard everything from the adjoining room. When she emerged, Kyle was staring out the window at the sprawling dominion below. All that territory, all those packs, all that responsibility pressing down on shoulders that had carried it alone for 12 years. You can't sacrifice the kingdom for me, she said quietly. Kale didn't turn. Is that what you think this is? What else could it be? Lyra moved closer. They're right, Kale. The packs are restless. The council is fractured. If you refuse tomorrow, everything could fall apart. Then let it fall. The words were barely a whisper, but they carried the weight of absolute conviction. Kale turned to face her. I spent 12 years doing what was right for the kingdom, 12 years choosing duty over everything else. It made me a good king. He crossed to her, each step deliberate. But you made me remember I'm also a man, and that man would rather burn his crown to ash than watch you sacrificed on the altar of political convenience. Lyra's throat tightened. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearer than I have in years. His hands cupped her face with devastating gentleness. They want me to choose between duty and love, between the crown and you, Kale. But what if there's a third option? What if we don't choose at all? What if we change the entire game? She stared at him. What are you saying, public bonding? Kale said. Tomorrow, before the coronation ceremony, in front of every Pack Alpha, every council member, every witness, we can gather. His eyes blazed with determination. We make them choose. Except that their Alpha King has found his mate, found his equal, found his strength, or reveal themselves as the corrupt manipulators they are by trying to prevent a sacred bond. Lyra's breath caught. That's insane, Kale finished. Reckless. Everything they've accused me of being. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. But it's also honest. True, the only choice that doesn't require one of us to sacrifice who we are. Lyra's heart hammered. But the bond, Oracle and Alpha combined, the power could be overwhelming. It could save us. Kale interrupted. Or it could destroy us. He pulled her closer. Either way, I'd rather face it with you than live another 12 years alone. The confession cracked through her last defenses. You're sure, Lyra whispered. I've never been more sure of anything. Then, the door burst open. Not Silas this time. Two guards bloodied and gasping. Your Majesty, the first guard choked out. Attack on the castle. Mercenaries, they're targeting. He didn't get to finish. The window behind them exploded. Not glass this time. Stone. The entire wall cracking as figures in black poured through. Kyle shifted instantly, putting himself between Lyra and the attackers. But there were too many. A dozen. 24, all armed, all moving with coordinated precision. This wasn't an assassination. This was an extraction. Lyra felt arms grab her from behind. She fought her wolf surging, but something cold and sharp pressed against her throat. Silvered blade, one cut would be fatal. Let her go, Kale roared, trying to reach her. But 3 mercenaries blocked his path, not trying to kill him, just contain him. Keep him from reaching Lyra as she was dragged backward through the shattered wall. The last thing she saw was Kyle fighting like a demon, screaming her name, silver eyes blazing with fury and fear. Then she was pulled into darkness, into the waiting arms of a figure in a black cloak. The figure laughed, low and cruel and horribly familiar. Hello, little Oracle. The cloak fell back, revealing a face that was Kyle's and wasn't. Same strong jaw, same high cheekbones, but scarred, twisted, burned on one side, silver eyes that had gone dead and cold. My brother always did have excellent taste. Dante Thornwolf smiled, and the world went dark. Lyra woke to darkness and the smell of old stone. Her head throbbed where they'd struck her. Her wrists burned where silvered chains bit into skin. But it was the absolute silence that terrified her most. The kind of silence that existed deep underground where screams couldn't reach the surface, where no one would hear you die. She forced her eyes open. Torchlight flickered against damp walls. Ancient dungeons, she realized. The ones beneath the old keep. The same keep where Kale's brother had supposedly died 15 years ago. Where Dante Thornwolf had been reborn. He sat across from her now scarred face, half in shadow. The burns that covered the left side of his features pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. But his eyes, those dead silver eyes, watched her with an intelligence that made her wolf press low with instinctive fear. You're awake, he said. His voice carried the same timbre as Kael's, but hollowed out, emptied of warmth. Good. I'd hate for you to miss this. Lyra tested the chains. Solid. Unbreakable. Where's Kale searching? Dante leaned forward, firelight dancing across his ruined features. My brother has always been predictable. Right now, he's probably tearing the castle apart, threatening to execute anyone who can't tell him where you are. He paused, something cruel flickering across his face. He's also probably on the edge of a complete shift, losing the legendary control he's so proud of. All because of you. Let me go. Lyra kept her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. This is between you and him. Is it? Dante stood circling her like a predator, studying prey. I don't think so. You see, little Oracle, you're not just leverage. You're proof. Proof of what? That everything my brother believes is wrong. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the madness lurking behind those dead eyes. Kale thinks mercy is strength. That treating Omegas as equals makes the kingdom stronger. That choosing love over duty is somehow noble. His hands shot out, gripping her chin, forcing her to look at him. But you and I both know the truth. The strong rule. The weak serve. And Omegas, no matter how special their bloodline, are meant to be claimed, not chosen. Lyra jerked her head away. You're wrong. Am I? Dante's laugh was bitter. Then why did the council contact me 6 months ago? Why did they beg me to return and take the throne from my compromised brother? Why do the border pacts whisper that the king has gone soft? Because they're afraid, Lyra said quietly. Afraid that if people have choices, they'll lose control. Exactly. Dante's smile widened, and they're right to be afraid, because control is everything. Without it, kingdoms fall, pacts fracture, chaos reigns. He knelt before her, his scarred face inches from hers. But you're going to help me prove it. You're going to bond with me. Willingly. Never. Not even to save Kyle's life. The question hung in the air like poison. Dante pulled a small vial from his pocket. Wolf's Bane extract, enough to kill even an Alpha King with immunity. All I have to do is send word and it gets slipped into his next meal. He dies in agony, the kingdom falls to me, and you, he tucked the vial away. You spend the rest of your life knowing you could have saved him, that your stubbornness killed the man you love. Lyra's heart hammered. You're bluffing. Try me. Dante stood. You have until midnight. Bond with me willingly, let me prove that even Oracle-born Omegas can be claimed and controlled, or watch your prophecy fail. Your choice. He left her in the darkness. And Lyra, alone with her chains and her terror, felt something begin to crack inside her. Not her resolve, her seal. The pain started small, a pressure behind her eyes, a buzzing in her skull. Then it exploded. Visions slammed into her consciousness like shattered glass, not the soft, dreamy fantasies she'd experienced before. These were sharp, clear, brutal in their clarity. She saw futures branching like lightning across a storm-dark sky. In one, she bonded with Dante to save Kale. Watched the light die in Kale's eyes as he realized what she'd done. Watched Dante use her oracle sight to crush rebellion, to identify threats before they formed to build an empire of fear. The Dominion burned, Omega suffered, and Kale, broken and hollow, eventually fell to an assassin's blade because he'd stopped caring whether he lived. In another, Kale rescued her but lost the vote. Civil war erupted. Pack fought pack. The kingdom tore itself apart. Thousands died. And in the end, Dante still won because chaos was his ally. Because a fractured kingdom was easier to conquer than a united one. But there was a third path, faint, fragile, harder to see. In it, she and Kale both survived. The kingdom transformed. But the path to that future was obscured, covered in blood and sacrifice and choices she couldn't yet see. Lyra gasped, the visions releasing her like a fist unclenching. Her nose was bleeding, her hands shook, but her mind was clearer than it had ever been. She understood now. The seal that had kept her oracle powers dormant, that had protected her from the council's notice, was breaking. The emotional trauma of the kidnapping, the terror of Dante's threats, the desperate need to warn Kale, all of it was cracking the barrier her mother had placed to keep her safe. And with the seal breaking came something else, the partial bond. She and Kale had never completed it, never joined skin to skin with intent. But they'd touched, shared space, breathed each other's air. And in that contact a thread had formed, golden and thin and barely there, but real. Lyra closed her eyes and reached for it. Kale. She didn't speak aloud, didn't need to. She pushed the thought down that golden thread along with images. The dungeons, the damp stone, the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. For a moment, nothing. Then, like an echo returning, she felt him. Rage, terror, desperate clawing need to find her, and underneath it all, a whisper. Lyra, where are you? She sent more images. The old keep, the collapsed tower, the entrance hidden behind rubble. His response was immediate. Hold on, I'm coming. But Lyra could feel something else through the bond. Kael's wolf was close to the surface. Too close. The control he'd maintained for 12 years was fracturing under the weight of fear and fury. Commander Silas was right. Kael was on the edge of a complete transformation. And if he lost himself to the wolf before he reached her, he'd be no match for Dante's coordinated forces. Lyra, she realized, would have to hold on more than physically. She'd have to keep him sane. Kael stood in the ruins of his chambers, surrounded by broken stone and shattered glass, and felt his humanity slipping away. The wolf demanded blood. Demanded he tear through the castle, rip apart anyone who might know where they'd taken her hunt, until he found her scent and followed it to the ends of the earth. The man, what was left of him, knew that wouldn't work. Dante was too smart, too prepared. This was a trap designed specifically to break Kael's control, to prove his brother's point that mercy and love made kings weak. Your Majesty. Commander Silas approached carefully, the way one might approach a feral animal. We've searched the castle. She's not here. Then search beyond it, Kael growled, his voice distorted. Every building, every tunnel, every... He stopped, a whisper in his mind, not words exactly, more like a feeling, a pull. Lyra. She was reaching for him through the bond he'd barely acknowledged existed. Kael closed his eyes and reached back. Images flooded his consciousness. Stone walls, darkness, the old keep, the same place Dante had supposedly died 15 years ago. Of course, Dante had survived the fire and collapse, had hidden in the very ruins everyone assumed were his tomb, had spent 15 years building his network, planning his revenge, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now he had Lyra. I know where she is, Kael said. Silas's eyes widened. How? The bond. Kael felt his wolf surge, but this time he didn't fight it. He let the partial shift ripple through him, let his eyes blaze gold and his claws extend. She's in the old keep dungeons. Dante has her. Then we go in force. Silas was already moving, calling for guards. No. Kael's voice carried absolute authority. Too many and he'll kill her. This needs to be surgical. You can't go alone. I won't. Kael looked at his most trusted commander. You, me, and 12 of your best. We go silent. We go fast. And we end this tonight. Silas nodded. And if it's a trap, then we spring it. Kael's smile was all wolf. And make them regret it. They descended to the old keep as the hour approached midnight. 12 guards, silent as shadows, armed with silvered weapons and grim determination. Kael led them through passages he hadn't walked in 15 years. The same passages he and Dante had played in as children before ambition and philosophy had driven a wedge between them that even blood couldn't bridge. The entrance was exactly where Lyra's vision had shown him, hidden behind rubble that looked natural but had been carefully arranged. Silas's men moved the stones aside, and Kael descended into darkness. The dungeon stretched beneath the old keep like a maze. Kael navigated by instinct and the golden thread that pulled him unerringly toward Lyra, toward the woman who'd become more essential than breath. They encountered the first guards 20 feet down. Kael didn't hesitate, didn't give them time to raise an alarm, just struck with brutal efficiency, his partial shift, giving him speed and strength that made the fight impossibly one-sided. Behind him, Silas's men moved like water, professional, coordinated, silent. They cut through 3 more guard posts before reaching the main chamber. Kael paused at the entrance, his wolf howling to charge and his human mind forcing caution. Through the doorway he could see her. Lyra, chained to a stone pillar, her head bowed, blood on her face, but alive. And standing before her as if he'd been waiting all along was Dante. Hello, brother, Dante said without turning. Right on time. Kael stepped into the chamber. Let her go. Now why would I do that? Dante turned, and Kael felt ice slide down his spine at the madness in those dead silver eyes. She's the key to everything. The proof that your philosophy is wrong. The leverage that will break you. She's an innocent woman you're using as a pawn. She's an oracle-born Omega with the power to see the future. Dante's smile was cruel. Nothing innocent about that. Nothing innocent about any of this. He gestured to the shadows. And on cue, figures emerged from the darkness. Not just mercenaries. Council members. Morgan Vale stepped forward, flanked by Counselor Draven and 3 others Kael had trusted. Their expressions were cold, calculating. Traitors. Realists, Morgan corrected. Your Majesty, you've had 12 years to prove that mercy and equality make kingdoms strong. Instead, the pacts grow restless. The borders weaken. All because you refused to rule with the strength required. So you made a deal with the brother who tried to kill me. We made a deal with the brother who understands that power requires sacrifice. Draven's voice was steady. That omegas are resources to be managed, not equals to be coddled. That a king who falls in love is a king who falls. This is your last chance, Morgan said. Denounce the oracle. Let us execute her for attempted poisoning and conspiracy. Take the throne with our support. Rule as you were meant to, or we install Dante and you die alongside your little fantasy. The choice hung in the air, and Kael realized this was what Dante had wanted all along. Not just to kill him, but to make him choose. To prove that love made kings weak by forcing him to pick between Lyra and the crown. To validate 15 years of twisted philosophy with a single moment of forced sacrifice. Kael looked at Lyra, at the woman who'd seen him as human when everyone else saw only power, who trusted him with her fantasies and her fears, who'd made him want to be more than just a king. Then he looked at Dante, at the council members who'd betrayed everything they'd sworn to protect. And he smiled, not the careful, controlled expression he showed the court, but something wild and absolutely devastating. You're right, he said quietly. Love does make me weak. Dante's smile widened. Finally, you see, it makes me weak to political games. Kael's eyes blazed pure gold, weak to threats and manipulation, weak to anyone who thinks they can use the people I care about as leverage. He let the shift ripple through him fully. Not complete, but close enough that his humanity became a thin veneer over the predator beneath. But it makes me very, very strong at violence. He struck before anyone could react. The battle that followed was chaos. Kael tore through Dante's mercenaries with brutal efficiency, moving faster than should be possible, each strike designed to incapacitate or kill. Behind him, Silas's guards engaged the council's forces. But Dante was waiting. He met Kael's charge with his own shift, and suddenly it was brother against brother, alpha against alpha. Two wolves who'd once played together, now fighting to the death. They were evenly matched. Dante had rage and madness on his side. Kael had skill and determination. They crashed together like thunderclaws and teeth and desperate fury. Across the chamber, Lyra watched the fight through eyes that had started to glow silver. The oracle seal was breaking. She could feel it cracking with each passing second, and with it came visions. Not of possible futures anymore, but of the present. She could see the threads of fate converging, could sense the exact moment when everything would either fall into place or fall apart. But more importantly, she could feel Kael through the bond, could sense when Dante would strike before it happened, could see the patterns in the chaos, and she realized something crucial. Her power wasn't meant to make her fight, it was meant to help him win. Kael, she called through the bond. Left, now. Kael dodged without thinking, without questioning. Dante's claws whistled through empty air where his throat had been a second before. Behind you, high, he ducked, spun, caught Dante's leg mid-kick and twisted. Dante roared, but Kael was already moving. Following Lyra's guidance through the bond, her foresight becoming his advantage, her vision becoming his edge. Together they were unstoppable. Dante realized it too late. He fell back breathing hard and made a desperate choice. If he couldn't win, he'd take everything with him. The vial, Dante snarled, pulling the wolf's bane extract from his pocket. Enough to kill you, to end your bloodline, to prove I was right all along. He raised it to his lips, and Lyra's seal shattered completely. Power exploded through her, not physical, not a wolf emerging, but something else entirely. Her eyes blazed pure silver, brighter than moonlight, brighter than stars, and she thrust her consciousness into Dante's mind with the full force of her oracle gift, made him see, showed him his future, every branching path, every possible outcome. In each one he lost. In one, Kael killed him here, quick, merciful. In another, he fled and spent the rest of his life running, hunted, afraid. In a third, he took the poison and died in agony alone and unmourned. But in all of them, every single one, Kael and Lyra survived. The kingdom transformed, the old laws shattered. And Dante's philosophy died with him, remembered only as a cautionary tale about what happened when power became its own justification. Lyra showed him all of it, made him live through each terrible future in the space of a heartbeat. And then she spoke directly into his mind. You already lost, she said, the moment you chose fear over love, power over connection, control over freedom. You lost. Dante staggered back, the vial falling from nerveless fingers. His eyes met hers. And for just a moment, she saw the brother he might have been. Before the fire, before the madness, before he'd let his philosophy consume him. Then Kael was there, disarming him with a single strike. It's over, Kael said. Dante, it's over. Dante looked between them, At Kale still standing despite everything, at Lyra blazing with oracle light, at the guards subduing Morrigan and Draven and the other traitors. He'd lost, and he knew it. 15 years of planning, 15 years of hatred. All of it for nothing. Dante's laugh was broken, hollow. You think you've won, brother. You think love conquers all. But the kingdom will never accept this. An oracle queen, a king who chooses his heart over duty. They'll tear you apart. Kale helped Lyra to her feet, breaking her chains with casual strength. Then let them try. I'm done choosing between who I am and who they want me to be. He pulled Lyra against his side, and I'm done pretending this isn't exactly what I want. The bond between them flared, golden and silver intertwined, still not complete, but close, so close. Silas secured the prisoners. Dante, Morrigan, Draven, 3 other council members, all bound in silvered chains, all facing trial for treason, conspiracy, and attempted murder of the crown. But Kael's focus was on Lyra. Are you hurt? His hands moved over her, checking for injuries with a gentleness that belied the violence he'd just unleashed. I'm fine, Lyra caught his hands. Kale, I'm fine. You're bleeding. Your nose? Oracle awakening. She managed a shaky smile. Turns out breaking ancient seals is messy. His eyes searched hers. What did you do to Dante? He looked. I showed him the truth, that he'd already lost, that we were always going to win. She leaned into Kael's warmth. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't strength, it's certainty. Kael pressed his forehead to hers. You're terrifying. You know that. You like it. I love it. The words escaped before he could stop them. I love you. Lyra's breath caught. It was the first time either of them had said it aloud. I love you, Kael repeated, his voice rough with emotion. I have since the moment you locked that door and chose to help me instead of walking away. Since you saw me as human instead of king. Since you made me want to be both. Lyra's eyes burned. I love you too. I've loved you since before I knew what it meant. Since my vision showed me a future where you chose me and I chose you, and together we changed everything. Then let's change everything, Kael said. Right now. The coronation ceremony began at dawn. Every pack alpha in the Dominion had been summoned. Every loyal council member. Every witness who could be gathered on such short notice. The throne room was packed. Hundreds of wolves all watching as their alpha king approached the dais. But he wasn't alone. Lyra walked beside him, dressed not in servant's clothes but in silver and white, oracle colors, her hair unbound, her eyes still carrying that faint silver glow from the awakening. She looked like moonlight given form, and she walked beside Kael as an equal. The murmuring started immediately, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through grass. The Omega Archivist, the one accused of poisoning, the Oracle-born. What was she doing beside the King? Kael took his place before the throne. The crown lay on a velvet cushion, waiting to be placed on his head in the traditional renewal of vows. Instead, he picked it up and set it aside. The murmuring stopped. Absolute silence crashed through the throne room. For 12 years, Kael began his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. I have ruled this kingdom according to laws that said strength required isolation. That choosing love made kings weak. That duty and desire could never coexist. He looked at Lyra. And for 12 years I was wrong. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Not wrong to rule with strength, Kael continued. Not wrong to prioritize the kingdom, but wrong to believe that required me to sacrifice every human connection. Wrong to think that power and love were mutually exclusive. He took Lyra's hand. This woman saved my life when I was bleeding in darkness. She saw me as human when everyone else saw only power. She trusted me with her secrets and her fears. And she made me realize that the strongest thing a king can do isn't rule alone. It's choose a partner who makes him better. Kael faced the crowd. I stand before you today to announce my choice, not as a political arrangement, not as a strategic alliance, but as a mate bond freely chosen by both parties. He turned to Lyra. If you'll have me. The question hung in the air. Lyra looked at him, at this man who'd counted 17 encounters, who'd noticed everything about her when she thought she was invisible, who'd fought through hell to save her, who was willing to risk his crown for the simple right to choose. And she smiled. I'll have you on one condition. Name it. You stop pretending this is a sacrifice. Lyra squeezed his hand. Because choosing each other isn't giving something up. It's gaining everything. Kael's answering smile was devastating. Deal. He pulled her close and they both felt it. The bond reaching. The golden thread thickening. becoming solid and real and undeniable. Skin met skin, intention met intention, and the bond snapped into place. Complete. Light exploded between them, gold and silver intertwining, Oracle and Alpha joining in a way that hadn't happened in 2 centuries. The power of it was visible, palpable. Everyone in the throne room could feel it washing over them like a wave, and it was beautiful. Kael and Lyra stood at the center of that light, holding each other, the bond thrumming between them with such intensity that it took their breath away. When the light finally faded, they remained, changed but not broken, stronger together than either could have been apart. The throne room was silent. Then one pack Alpha stepped forward, an older man with silver in his hair and scars that spoke of decades of survival. I witnessed this bond, he said clearly, and I support it. Another Alpha came forward, then another. One by one they approached the dais, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The Oracle has chosen. One said, the king has shown us what real strength looks like. Said another, if this is weakness, give us more of it. Said a third, even the remaining council members, the ones who hadn't betrayed the crown, knelt. We were wrong, one admitted, about duty, about bonds, about what makes a kingdom strong. Perhaps another said quietly, it's time for new laws. Commander Silas approached with the crown, but instead of placing it on Kael's head alone, he paused. Your Majesty, there's a second crown. The Oracle crown, unused for 200 years. If the Queen would accept. Lyra's breath caught. I'm not. You are, Kael said gently. Oracle-born, freely chosen, my equal in all things. If you'll accept the responsibility. Lyra looked at the crowd, at the pack Alphas watching with respect rather than judgment, at the council members who'd knelt, at Silas holding both crowns, at Kael who'd given her everything and asked only that she choose him in return. I'll accept, she said, on behalf of every Omega who was never given the choice, every person treated as currency, every voice that was silenced. Silas placed both crowns, gold on Kael's head, silver on Lyra's. All hail, he said, his voice ringing through the throne room. The Alpha King and his Oracle Queen. The crowd erupted, not in dissent but in celebration, and Lyra understood. The prophecy had been right. Old laws were shattering. The kingdom was transforming. But it wasn't breaking. It was becoming something better. The weeks that followed were a blur of reforms and reconstruction. Council trials, border negotiations, the slow, careful work of transforming a kingdom that had resisted change for generations. But 6 months later, Lyra stood on the tower balcony and watched the sun set over the Stonewolf Dominion, and everything felt different. So much had changed. The council had been reformed. Omegas now had equal representation. Bonding was a choice, not a decree. The border pacts were stronger, not weaker, because their king was bonded and stable and leading with both strength and compassion. Dante was imprisoned but alive. Kael had chosen mercy over execution. Not because his brother deserved it, but because killing him would have proven his philosophy right. That strength without compassion was the only way. Instead, Dante lived, a permanent reminder that the old ways had failed. Warm arms wrapped around Lyra from behind. Kael's scent pine and winter surrounded her. His presence through the bond was a constant comfort now, a golden thread that had become as essential as breathing. What are you thinking about? He asked, voice rough with affection. How far we've come. Lyra leaned back against his chest. How much has changed? Do you regret it? Choosing me over safety? Lyra turned in his arms, meeting those silver eyes that had first noticed her when she thought she was invisible. I choose you every day, she said. That's not regret. That's freedom. Kael smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. Good, because I'm not done changing things. The council wants to establish Oracle academies, places where others with the gift can learn to use it, where Omegas can study and grow and choose their own paths. That's ambitious. That's necessary. He pulled her closer. You showed me that power without choice is just another cage. I intend to make sure no one else has to hide who they are just to survive. Lyra kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, the moon was rising, full and bright and casting silver light across the kingdom below. Kael looked at that moon and then at Lyra. You know what's ironic? What the moon didn't force me to choose you. The bond didn't make this decision for us. We chose each other despite every obstacle, despite the council and the prophecy and all the reasons it should have been impossible. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly familiar now. That's what makes it real. Lyra's eyes burned with happy tears. In the Stone Wolf Dominion, they learned that the most powerful thing a king could do was choose love without fear. And the most dangerous thing an Omega could be, Kale continued pulling her close, was the woman who taught him how. They stood together on the balcony as night fell, two people who'd found each other in darkness, who'd chosen each other despite the cost, who transformed a kingdom simply by refusing to sacrifice their humanity for power. And in the distance, across the Dominion, they ruled together. Wolves howled, not in challenge or threat, but in celebration, because their Alpha King had finally found what he'd been searching for all along, not a crown or a kingdom or unchallenged power, but a partner who saw him as human and loved him anyway.